Hi, this is Rich Harrington, and you're listening to the Photofocus podcast. The Photofocus podcast is brought to you every week with different guests and topics to help you learn more about photography and stay inspired. We've got a special guest this week. It's Nicole Young, and she's a well-known photo educator and a great photographer from the West Coast. I've known Nicole for many years, and she always has practical advice that any photographer can use. Before we jump into this week's interview, I'd like to take a moment just to thank a couple of our partners. If you're looking for a great way to organize and find your photos, then check out Exire. It's both a plugin and an application that makes it easy to tag, keyword, and find just about any photo on your hard drive in a matter of seconds. And if you're looking for new creative options for editing, be sure to explore Luminar AI. Luminar AI has got many features and also works as a standalone application or as a plugin for both Apple and Adobe software. Okay, let's jump in and hear from Nicole Young. And if you want to learn more about Nicole, she's going to be speaking at the Visual Storytelling Conference later in May. This is a great free event that Photofocus is sponsoring, so be sure to check that out at visualstorytellingconference.com. Hi, you're listening to the Photofocus podcast, and today we are talking with photographer and educator Nicole Young. Nicole is very creative in her workflow and has a great balance between both her shooting style and her post-production. Nicole, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Rich. Thanks for having me on.
Great. Glad to have you back. Nicole's, you've also written before in the past, and you have a lot of articles out there, a ton of books. What are some of your specialties that you feel in the world of photography? What are you most passionate about taking pictures of?
You know, I hate to use the word generalist because it's kind of like people kind of frown on that word, but I kind of consider myself in that category of the type of photography. A lot of people know me for my food photography. I had, probably 2 or 3 or 4 solid years where I was really doing a lot of food. It's kind of tapered off. I'm sure I'll bounce I kind of go in cycles. I kind of focus on one thing and then I kind of transition and I focus on another thing. Like I said, a lot of people probably know me for my food photography. Like lately, I've been really just kind of, and partly because of what, pandemic and like being quarantined and all these things, I've been doing a lot of macro photography. Basically anything I could do either in like the neighborhood I was living in, or now I live out in the country. So I kind of have tried to find ways to just kind of photograph things around my house, around on my property.
Well, we are having to be creative. I know that, your food photography, as well as I know you've done some experiments with water droplets.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely are good at, I don't want to call it still life, but you definitely are great at the tabletop shooting, and that approach of creating these environments and then making these beautiful images. Are there any secrets or advice you have when sort of building these setups that you could set up in a home or in an office?
I'd say for doing, let's say, tabletop photography, you want to find a space that has really good light coming through the window. And, that could be a north-facing window. It's usually what I recommend. But you can diffuse light coming in through, if you have harsh light coming through, put a diffuser or just like a translucent piece of white cloth that will kind of block that light coming through. Light is definitely going to be the most important aspect of this. If you're photographing, let's say food, because that's an obvious one. If the light is bad, if you have like this yellow light coming, like overhead, countertop light or whatever, the food's it's not going to look very good. And that doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what you're photographing. If the light's not good, then you're off to a poor start to begin with. So if you can find kind of just that nice little corner of your home to set things up, then, and I do that for a lot of things. If let's say I'm reviewing a lens or something, I'll have this little station and I'll set it up. And I don't have a big studio. I've always done, not always, I had, for a very, very brief moment in time, I had a kind of a little studio I was working on when I was doing my stock photography. But for the majority of my tabletop photography, it's all been done in my home. And I just kind of, carve out a little space, either in my kitchen or my office. And I use that. And it's the light is going to be the thing you want to work on the most. If you're going to do close-up stuff, you want a macro lens, but that's, if you have good light, then you're usually going to create a pretty good photograph.
And with the environment itself, what about the actual table surface? Do you just keep a a pile of wooden tops and fabric around, or how do you mix it up so that it doesn't always look exactly the same?
I've kind of used a bunch of different ways of doing things. I had a contractor actually he's a carpenter put together an interesting table setup for me, and it's not really the like easiest thing to have because I have these really big, like they're real surfaces, like real wood, and I can kind of flip them around, and I have like two or three different ones I can use. So I have some nice, like a concrete style surface. I have a kind of a rusty surface. I have some like reclaimed wood surface, and that's really heavy. It creates some beautiful back, like kind of tabletop areas for any photo I'm doing, whether it's food or whatever. So that's one option, using real wood. I've also in the past I've had I had somebody who was taking their old cedar fence down, and so I basically just took some of those boards that they had, and they were just I don't know maybe like 3 feet long, 2 or 3 feet long, and then I would just kind of keep them off to the side. And whenever I wanted to use them, I just kind of piece them together. So it kind of gave it like a picnic table look. And then of course you can also use like there's a couple places you can go to, or several I should say, but two that I've used. If you're looking for like a vinyl top, like Ink and Elm is one brand that I've used, and if you Google like vinyl photography tabletop or backdrops, then you can usually find some really good options. They replicate, the look of things. But I will say if you're photographing on a surface, on a tabletop, and the actual surface of that vinyl is really visible, or if the light's hitting it, then it's kind of apparent and obvious that it's like fake. If you're using it as a backdrop, then it's going to be a little bit easier to kind of like fake it and have it look real. There's also a company called, I think it's Replica Surfaces. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. They create these kind of square shaped replicas, and they look a little bit more realistic. They're rigid. They're not vinyl, so you can't like roll them up. They're a lot more expensive though. I bought a few out of curiosity, and I'm happy with them so far. There's really a lot of different options. Kind of encourage anyone who's doing this to kind of get creative and just kind of find different things. Maybe go to like estate sales or garage sales, or if you have like one of those, I can't think of what they're called. They're those like, I know in Portland, there's a place where you can go and people like, let's say they're doing projects and they tear out a whole bunch of wood or cabinets or whatever from their house. They can donate it to this place. So you can go there and sometimes find good reclaimed wood to use. But it really kind of depends on how much space you have, on which options you go with.
Right. And obviously, as a photographer, you have to decide how much you're allowed. And then if you happen to share your residence or your office with somebody else, periodically you have to have a purging. Like we just purged our prop closet at the office the other day because it's overflowing. And it's like, well, yeah, we haven't used this one in a while. Let's donate that. And it's hard, but otherwise it becomes like an episode of Hoarders after a while.
I've done that with like my dishes with food photography because I've moved around so much too, and having to like constantly repack all of these dishes that I have like a special set of dishes that I collect for specifically for food photos, and because sometimes something will catch my eye. I like to go to estate sales and garage sales and antique shops, and I had to go through and just get rid of a whole bunch of stuff just like that at one point, especially because I keep moving. Thankfully, I'm kind of set in my home now, and I don't plan on going anywhere for a while, but it's still, it's easy when you're like, for me, my life, I work at home, I live at home, and all of my hobbies, photography plus all the other things I love to do, it just ends up taking so much space in my storage, in my garage, wherever. So you kind of have to minimize that every once in a while.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about composition. So you shoot a variety of different subjects. I know you do portrait photography occasionally, and you might shoot candids or stock. You shoot objects and food. You've shot some nature. You shoot landscapes. You do embrace lots of different genres. Do you find yourself applying the same sort of decisions in camera, or do you have different sets of rules for composition for each genre? And if you do, how do you go about developing those? Is it through study? Is it through, do you rely upon post more and just do it after the fact? How do you think these through?
That's a really good question. Composition, I think, is probably, if it doesn't come naturally to someone, it's probably one of the more difficult things to learn. Like when I see a new photographer, somebody who maybe they're not a photographer, but they just take pictures with their iPhone, I, and their photos are really good. I see that as someone having a really good eye, because composition to me is kind of it's kind of what photography, what makes photography good or bad. Um, and I, I I would say that with certain things, I do stick with a very specific composition. Like water drop photography is a great example. I almost always center that water drop, so it's right in the center, like the vertical or horizontally, it's centered in the frame. Um, I will though play with
Because
the
there's a lot of
composition.
symmetry in that type of
Oh yeah,
photography. You
there's a
want that.
ton of symmetry. Yeah, so you're if it's off center, unless you're going for if I was photographing something, let's say I decided to write a book on, this is kind of a design thing, but if I was going to write something about like a book or a course on water drop photography, I might do a few photos where I had, the water drop off to the side. So I had a lot of copy space on one side, but that's a rare example of when I would probably stray or deviate from the standard, nice and centered in the middle of the frame. But with that though, there's also water reflections with that. So, with the water drop. So I do have to look and see, well, where's what's the reflection going to look like? What's my backdrop look like? Is there a line in the background? I need to make sure it's level and even. And there's a lot of fine tuning with that type of work because you're really close and kind of zoomed in or macro, have a macro lens on that. With other photos, though, like food photography, I like to call my food photos food portraits because I think it's kind of like a living thing in a way to me, and it's beautiful. I do I do have kind of a set composition I work with food photographs. A lot of the times, if I'm photographing horizontally, I like to fill like about 2/3 of the frame or a little bit more with the food, and just kind of, let's say, like a straight on shot, not a top down shot. So then the food is really the focus there, and then see a little bit of the background, so you kind of get the environment in the shot. Vertically is another. Maybe I'll put it on the lower third. If let's say it's like a I don't know, like a plate of pasta or something. I have it maybe in the lower third, and then the top part is going to be somewhere the background stuff. You're really working a lot with rule of thirds with most everything, except with the exception of centering something in the frame. I just with one of the birds, I shared a photo of one of the birds I photographed on Instagram, and while if you look at the photo, the entire bird is centered in the frame. The eyes are going to be off on the left, and they're going to be kind of like you can see the eyes. I would have a nice little catch light in the eyes, so that's similar. I would say anything with eyes is going to be, aside from maybe a bug like a little bee or something, is going to be kind of like photographing a person. You want to focus on the eyes. You want those eyes you want that part of the frame to be probably resting somewhere on a third line. It's kind of tough to talk about composition. I've written about it, but it is a challenging thing, and I understand the struggle with photographers who are trying to learn this because I could look at two photos and say, well, I don't like that one because I don't like the composition. And then if someone asks me why, then it's like, oh, well, let me explain why. But actually talking about it without any visuals is a little bit more challenging.
Do you sometimes study other people's composition or look to see, paintings or other sources? I often find myself enjoying a day at a museum because I find that, if somebody took the time to make a painting that way and it's managed to carry forward over decades or centuries, that maybe there's something to it. Not that there's not a consistent style there, but like I love going to the National Portrait Gallery here in Washington, D.C., and it's so interesting to see, what carries forward. And many of those are painted portraits. They do, of course, have a photography section as well, but there's a certain, I guess, classics that often appeal to humans.
When I really think about the composition, it's because something is really different in the photo, and I go, wow, I really like that, but it's not, maybe typical. And then I kind of like go through my head, like, why do I like this? A really great example, and now it's video, but it's still visual. And it's there's a TV show called Mr. Robot, and if you're into like technology and all that stuff, I really recommend it. But one of the things I did with their cinematography is they would add a lot of tension by, like, so traditionally, let's say you have a horizontal framing and you have a person looking kind of to the side, they have a side shot, a side profile view. A lot of the times they're going to have a lot of space in front of them, so that's a very common framing. That's a very common composition because that's kind of where they're leading. Maybe they're talking that direction. This show would do like the exact opposite. They would have the person talking almost to the edge of the frame, but the way they did it, and of course it adds so much to the story, it just adds a lot of tension, and it's just unique and it was different, and I absolutely loved it. I don't know how well it would carry over with a photograph. I think it would have to maybe depend on what was going on in the scene. Kind of, I would say if it has like a very standard composition, then it's kind of like good light. Unless you don't notice it. If it's just good, let's say like soft diffused, like shaded, nice light, you don't really notice the light.
Right.
If there's something really amazing about it, you go, wow, now I really see it. This is more than just the subject. This is about the light as well. So it's usually when something kind of stands out like that in a unique but beautiful way that it really makes me think about it.
I think it's always good to consider, looking at other things and see how people respond. But you bring up a very good point, which is sometimes composition, just like a vignette, should be so subtle that nobody notices or comments on it. But every once in a while, in a regular composition, can really be intriguing to folks and kind of opens things up. But yeah, these days cameras have seen such great improvements, not that they can make the pictures for us, but probably the greatest variable that we have as photographers is what do we point the camera at and how do we compose the shot? Because the exposure, the focus, and so many other things are often, not always, but often can be done for us in a way that's technically pleasing.
Yeah, like I'm not afraid of using like aperture priority is a good example, or I use ISO priority a lot actually, because which is less important in certain ways. You don't want the photo to be too grainy, but I'm still making those decisions. I'm still deciding, well, I know that if I set this and this, let's say ISO and aperture, the shutter speed here isn't going to matter too much. So, it's going to freeze it regardless. The photo I'm taking doesn't matter what, it's not going to be blurry if I let it sit. Like a food photo is a great example. If it's a 2-second exposure, but nothing's moving in the frame, then it doesn't matter. It's still going to, bring in the same amount of light. So I've been of course, I know we're not going to go down the whole, like overdone conversation about, people who think that you have to shoot in manual to be a real photographer. But, and I think a lot of people are past
And I
that,
just asked those same
especially.
people, do you drive a stick shift
Yeah.
and with manual steering and no power steering?
Yeah,
Because
no power steering. That's a good one.
so your car has no power windows, no power steering, and it's manual, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, there are a lot of people who want to gatekeep and be like snobby elitist photographers. And I've always just been like, whatever. I just kind of brush that off and I just do what I want to do.
Manual has its place. I will use manual all the time in my time-lapse photography where I don't want things to change over time other than the scene. So understanding the exposure triangle and understanding manual can greatly help your photography. But for the same reasons that we have power steering on our cars, it's just more convenient and do what makes it easier.
Yeah,
So.
exactly.
Well, let's talk about gear for a moment. We've all through the years bought equipment that we've regretted or bought something on the cheap side because we weren't sure and then it didn't work out for us. What are maybe 5 pieces of gear that are essential to your style of photography that you find yourself bringing almost every time? Things you're really passionate on beyond just the camera body itself. We all have our own platforms we prefer, but are there any supporting pieces of equipment or types of lenses that you just find essential to your type of work?
Yeah. So of course that's going to depend on, like what I'm photographing. Okay, so right now, what I would be doing if I were to go out, let's say hiking, and if there's a lot of mushrooms out there, a lot of things to photograph that are macro. I'll kind of like go through like I guess that. Of course, my camera. Well, yeah, like you said, we have to have a camera. I'm definitely going to bring a macro lens. I've kind of been in this big like, I want to like find all the little things and take pictures of them because it's fun. And in the spring is coming up pretty soon, and that makes me so excited because I love to chase bees and try to get really cute photos of them, like getting the pollen off of the lavender plant or whatever they're you know flower of choices. So definitely a macro lens. Sometimes I'll also bring like an 8x10 gray card. And I don't use that for exposure. I use that as a backdrop. So if I find, let's say, like a fern, like a little fiddlehead, they're like the little curly bits that are the start of a fern that kind of pop up first in the early spring out here, at least in the Pacific Northwest. I'm sure they're throughout the United States. And if you have too many things going on in the background, it can get really busy. So I'll bring this like this gray card, and it could be black, it could be whatever, and I'll just kind of like rest it behind the thing that I'm photographing, and then I'll take pictures. So then I have a really clean background to the photo. So that's the second one. I will bring a tripod oftentimes, but if I'm going to do, let's say, mushrooms, if I'm looking for mushrooms, I will bring, a lot of times I do it all handheld. So it's not really super important to use a tripod, and I'm trying to travel and like hike as light as possible with my gear. So I've been kind of playing around with the Platypod, and it's like a little flat, I'm sure you know what it is, Rich. It's that little flat kind of, disc or like strange like shaped thing that you
Yeah,
can just put
it's based on the platypus. So
yeah,
the
like
platypod,
the
yeah,
foot.
it's
Oh, I figured it was something like that.
yeah, it's actually based on a platypus tail. I'm friends with the guy who invented it, so I've used them forever. You're taking advantage there. You get to use the same ball head, but you can go right on the ground with a low
Yeah.
angle and get those shots without carrying all the weight.
Yeah, you just set it down on the ground, and it comes with those little, like, the little feet that you can, so if you need to, like, adjust it. But so that's a really good one for getting super, super low, and you can just, like, slide it in your backpack and just carry the ball head around. I need to find, like, just like I wanna find, like, a little tiny ball head for mine, though. That's, like, one of the things I've
Yeah.
been searching for, like a Arca Swiss,
Offline,
like,
I'll give
ball
you a
head.
couple of recommendations.
Oh, that'd
I've
be great.
found a nice one from Really Right Stuff that's a little expensive, but still quite
They're still
nice.
good,
And then
though.
I've got some really tiny ones that are simple from
Yeah.
Benro and others. So you and I can compare notes later. I don't want to buy endorsements for any of these things, but I've bought about 5 different ones because in my shop we do a lot of product photography, and for a certain camera manufacturer to show off their stuff, and we also do some hard drives and electronics for others. And so we go through so much of this stuff, and if I don't like it, it doesn't mean that Jake in my office, who does most of our product photography, doesn't like it. So we have gear that gets swapped around with us, and we tween it. So we can have an offline conversation. But you're right. You still can't replace a stable shot. I know a lot of people that leave the tripod at home, and that's why I have a good carbon fiber tripod that's super light, so I can't say it's
Mhm.
too heavy. And I have a
Yeah.
really heavy tripod when I have to shoot video, and I don't care about the weight. But it's a stable shot. You can't fix that in post. If it's not stable, you can't fix it.
Yeah, and especially with what I'm doing with, let's say with mushrooms, if I can get a lot of really great photos handheld, but if it gets a little too dark, then, the ISO is gonna have to get bumped up really high. And if, I'm photographing with an 80 macro on a crop frame sensor, which means that, if I'm at f2.8, then I only have a tiny little piece of that mushroom in focus, especially if it's really small. So if I want to, stop the aperture down, I'm gonna lose light, I might need that tripod then, or that platypod. Is it platypod or platypod? How do you pronounce it?
Platypod, like a platypus.
Platypod, okay. So I've been pronouncing it wrong forever, but
It's
now I
okay.
know.
When I was a kid, one of the few words I couldn't say, I always said photographer.
That's really cute.
It was part of my speech impediment, but I could never say the word photographer until I was about 15.
The irony, right? You finally made it.
I said the word so many times, I eventually decided that maybe I liked it.
Like osmosis, right?
So any other equipment? Do you carry, when you're shooting these objects, do you bring any LED lighting or a pocket reflector? Do you ever add light to the scene to fill it in?
Not when I'm hiking, not like if I'm just, I go really just all natural with that. And,
Mhm.
it's really diffused light, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I live in Oregon. So lots of, cover with the trees. And of course it's cloudy like most of the
I was going
time
to say, you
anyways.
pretty much have perennial soft
Yeah,
spot
I
lighting,
do.
don't you? Hey,
I
look,
do. I have a
it's
beautiful
partly
natural.
cloudy.
Yeah, basically. But then on days that it's not, I've had some days where the sun was really shining, and I got some really beautiful like backlight from that too. So, I just kind of have to work with whatever I have. Um, those are like the kind of the 3 main things, and then there's always small accessories. I think right now there's a bag that I really want to buy, but it's like out of stock everywhere. Lately, I've been looking for a really good, like slim, small, compact hiking bag with a place, like something I could put like a camelback bladder in, or
Mhm.
whatever. And there, for some reason, there are very, very few. Like there's a bunch out there. Like I have some f-stop gear bags, and those are great, but they're just too big for just
Yeah.
like like doing a let's say I want to hike up a mountain, because I would like to get into doing some longer, higher elevation hikes, and I'm not going to carry like a big f-stop bag for that. I want something that's going to carry, my Fujifilm X-T3, like maybe my 1855, and maybe a longer lens, like maybe like two lenses with this, like this, and then some snacks and water, and that's all I want to take. I don't want to take very much, and it's so difficult to find stuff like that. They're all bags that are just for hiking, and they don't have a nice little compartment. So I found one
Yeah.
finally, but like I said, it's out of stock everywhere. So I'm just kind of waiting.
I just bought a new bag for similar purposes, but it wasn't small. I got it, that one that was modular from Mindshift, so that I could put a smaller camera compartment in, and then have room for the water bladder and everything else that I would normally carry. Because like if I am out, I'm often camping or doing other things, and so I put a smaller camera compartment in and had room for everything else, and it has a nice internal frame so that it's not floppy, so that even if you don't fill it up, it's not too bad. But there's so many great options. I like using camera cubes for things like that, Nicole, too, because that way you can still pack the gear safe and secure, but maybe compromise and find another bag that wasn't specifically a camera bag, but still know that your camera gear is safe inside. It's a really hard battle. I'm sure we all have
Yeah.
closets of bags
Oh gosh,
that we
I
bought in the
sure
credit.
do. I've probably given some away, just because I kind of accumulate them, and I just wrote a review. I got a bag for free from a company. It was a One-Mo bag. It's a really nice bag. So I got that, and I wrote a review on it. So now I have this other bag, and I'll probably let my boyfriend use it a lot. He's not a photographer, but he's kind of getting into photography. And it's like camo, so he'll love it. Kind of need like a big like wall in my garage just with hooks so I can hang them all on there and see them.
I have a closet in my home office at the basement here where I've just got a shelf, and it's all of that other stuff that I have not yet been able to part with, but I don't use all the time. And there's a bin full of bags. And but the funny thing is something will come up where you need it for a particular shoot. It's you keeping your gear safe is important. So it just depends on the style of what it is you're doing. Now, any other equipment that you find essential to your genre that you're using a
When
lot?
I'm doing any other photography, like food or tabletop, I really really love those pop up diffusers. There's like the tri grip style, the triangle ones.
Mhm.
I really like those because if you need to hold it with your hand, you've got a handle that's really easy to hold on to. They're very rigid. They fold up, but they're also very rigid. But then if you need to set it like against like let's say you have a beam of light coming through and you need to block that, if you have a round diffuser, that thing is so hard to prevent from like rolling around if you're just going to set it against the table. So the triangle shaped ones are really nice because they just lean against the wall or the window, and they don't move. Of course, you can always connect things to a light stand, but if I'm just photographing something in my office, I'm not gonna bother. That's just too much work.
And those tri-grips, besides being diffusers, often have a sleeve that can go around it, so you can
Mhm.
make it a reflector or you can make it a flag. And and folks, if you've never bought something like this is one. I mean, there's so many manufacturers of them, but this is one of the cheapest pieces of lighting equipment you can get, and it lets you soften the sun, bounce the sun, or block the sun, which pretty much covers everything you need to do with natural light.
Yep, pretty much.
Good, good. Now you mentioned that you are teaching a significant other photography. This is one of those things. Let's do relationship advice for photographers. I think we have a hard time explaining to folks our insanity of, wow, you guys move really slow, or why are we getting up so early? Um, you got any practical advice here of how to maintain a healthy relationship when you want to do more photography than your significant other?
Well, so I have the benefit of my boyfriend's name is Jason. So I have the benefit of Jason. He's one of those people I was kind of mentioning before. he wasn't a photographer, he's not a photographer, but obviously I'm a photographer and he's kind of seen me do stuff and I have an extra camera. So I'm kind of starting to be like, hey, why don't you play with this? And he's having a lot of fun with that. So he's kind of starting to get into it. But let's say we go on a really long hike. I have always been like, I give you full permission because he's much more fit than I am. He's very athletic and he likes to go fast and he likes to run and he has to do all these things. And I like to try to find the mushrooms and take pictures of them and walk really slowly. So I'm like, you have full permission to just go ahead. We don't have to stay together on this. If it's an out and back hike, go up ahead and then do your thing and then come back and we'll, kind of meet somewhere in the middle and then, go back the other way and finish the hike. So kind of that, that works for me there in that regard. We haven't done it, we've never traveled together because we met in 2019, but we, of course, nobody's really been able to travel anywhere because of the pandemic and not, the travel restrictions and all of this. So that'll be kind of interesting when we finally do get to start traveling. Of course, he's a very reasonable guy and, we both get along so well, obviously, but he's not the kind of person who's going to be upset with me if I just want to linger a little bit longer and get a photo. So I think just, I don't know. It's hard to say, I want to be like, oh, let's talk from the significant other's perspective, like have some patience and let them do their thing. Because my previous relationship, my ex was a photographer. So of course it was a little bit different because we had a lot of the same goals with that, with whatever we want to do. But, yeah, I don't know really where else to go.
Sometimes it's communicating or managing expectations.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've learned is I'm better if I pack my bag smaller. Like if I just commit to 1 or 2 lenses for the day and I've got room in my bag to carry other stuff for other people and it doesn't look like I'm going out for a week-long campaign, then I don't stand out as much and I don't look as weird.
I did actually think of a couple other things that you kind of reminded me. So, I carry my own stuff and I have always told him, I'm like, I don't expect you to carry my bag for me. So I'm going to carry my stuff, and that's something that I do. I'm not going to be like, oh, here, carry my bag for me. And I'll just get the stuff that I need out of it. He's offered to, if we do some kind of sketchy, passes or hikes or, areas where I might have to climb up something. He's like, he'll take my bag for me and then we'll do that. And then he'll just give it back to me. So, I carry what I pack. I don't expect him to take anything from me. But I think another thing that's really nice about being with a non-photographer is it makes you see life a little bit more with your eyes. I'm less inclined to feel like I have to photograph everything, even though I love creating photos. I really do my best to just enjoy moments, even if I don't have my camera and I don't go, oh, I wish I had my camera. I wish I could take a picture of it. I just enjoy it, and because it's life. And, granted, we all are photographers. If you're listening to this, you're into photography and I love to create photos, but I also don't want to be staring through a lens my entire life.
Yeah. And there's an opportunity there to combine photography with other joys. Like we're going to use this opportunity as we explore to go to a great restaurant that we want to try, or let's leave enough time, after we make it to the top of the mountain to, have a glass of wine and enjoy the view for an hour. So
yeah. Or go on a trip that isn't about photography, which is very hard to do.
But you'll find great pictures usually almost everywhere. So
exactly.
Good. Well, Nicole, it's been great talking to you. If folks want to find out more about your photography, as well as check out your extensive library of educational content and cool textures and presets, where should they go?
So on the internet, I'm basically Nicolesy. So it's Nicole, so Nicolesy. If you go to Nicolesy.com, that'll direct you to my blog. And that from there, you can find my online store. I'm on Instagram with Nicolesy. I've kind of joined that new app called Clubhouse and kind of starting to kind of build that and kind of connect with people there. So that's another fun thing. But yeah, if you just Google Nicolesy, I'm very easy to locate.
Excellent. And I encourage you folks, she's got some wonderful educational tutorials on a variety of tools, as well as just some incredible handmade textures and other things. Some really good inspirational stuff there and some cool products you should check out. Nicole, thank you for making time today to share some practical advice with folks. And I hope you get to explore more of the world here as we start to get unlocked from our homes.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks again to Nicole Young for joining us for this week's podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the Photofocus podcast, where you'll get inspiration every week from different photographers. You'll find us on all the popular podcast platforms, and while you're there, please consider leaving us a review. Also, if you'd like to connect with your fellow photographer, be sure to check out community.photofocus.com. This is a chance to join the Photofocus online community where there are critiques, photo challenges, and lively discussions. It's absolutely free and a great alternative to traditional social media. My name's Rich Harrington. I'm the publisher of Photofocus.com, and we've been bringing you news and inspiration for more than 22 years. Thanks for joining us.